inspiring announcements. We love them. All right. Let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, as we sit in your presence this evening, I pray that you will wash our minds with just your presence, that we will be focused, that you will open up our understanding to see things that we've never seen before, even if they've been right in front of us. Lord, cause us to be useful. Create in us flexibility, that you may mold and shape us into your image. Lord, help us to see others the way they have been raised, the way that they think. Help us to understand our upbringing and our thought processes, that we may be able to step out of our culture into their culture and be your ambassadors. Male, female, young and old. Jesus, we want to be used by you. We want to truly grasp the reality of the Great Commission, that the word, that discipleship, that salvation needs to go to all people. Help us, Lord, to cross borders, cultural barriers, mindsets. Lord, open our eyes, open our ears, open our hearts tonight to hear your perfect will, your perfect desire for this next season of our lives individually and together as a church body. We thank you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, this week we want to talk about worldview. The great thing about worldview is, without understanding worldview, we can't begin to peel back somebody's heart and understand their culture. So the class as a whole is entitled Understanding Culture. Well, today's lesson is understanding worldview, so that then we can understand someone's culture, where it comes from, and why they do what they do. So worldview must be known as we begin to enter into new places and new people groups. On a short review, this is going back to the first class. This is actually class number 3. Going back to our first class, we understood that culture, simply put, is the way my mother taught me to live. Do this, don't do that. And if you're parents, you're reminded of this every single day. I sit mostly with my son. He's 9 and he's a bit crazy. He's like me. Like when I was his age, I was just like him. And I said, son, don't you know that I told you yesterday that that was very rude and you can't say that to your mom? You can't say that to your sisters. You can't do that, especially in church. And he's like, oh yeah, Dad. I said, yes, and that was 100th time I've told you. So maybe by the 1,000th time, he'll pick up culturally what's right and wrong. Really, that's what culture is: respectful, honorable, things of that nature. And our actions speak louder than our words. And then continuing in our review, cultural identity. We are not American Christians or Asian Christians. We are Christians that live in a country or on a continent with a specific mindset, and we have to adopt that mindset based upon the Bible and then add on the local customs to become what we truly call heavenly ambassadors, to be permanent citizens of heaven and temporary citizens on this earth, wherever the Lord would like us to be at that moment, short or long term. And then we ask the question, and this is because we need to have this so ingrained in us that we're reviewing it again, why should we be sensitive to culture? Why should we be sensitive to culture? Because when we are sensitive to someone else's culture, they will feel that we love them and respect them, and therefore those cultural walls will come down, communication will open up, and then finally there'll be trust that turns into discipleship. So trust, relationship, discipleship. That is the reason for cultural sensitivity. It is essential to the Great Commission. And then didn't we have a really fun time last week talking about Jesus, the perfect missionary? Wasn't that neat? And we just barely scratched the surface. And all of you knew those scriptures that we looked at. John chapter 1, the Word became flesh. 1 John chapter 1, we touched, we tasted, we handled. We know who the Word of life is. And when you know that word of life, then you can have fellowship with the believers and fellowship with the Father. And so we saw how Jesus' incarnation was essential. And now he's asking us to die to everything we know is normal, to become like him, to be incarnated in someone else's culture. So the reading for this week, we didn't read Ministering Cross-Culturally. We only read Cross-Cultural Connection. Did you enjoy the story of the monkey and the fish? Wasn't it fun? Now, did you notice how long the story was?
Yeah.
Very short.
It was a paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
How much did that paragraph challenge you? So he opened up with a paragraph. He told us the story. I'll just kind of maybe retell it in case somebody didn't read it. There was a monkey that was trapped on a little island in a huge river because of a storm. And as he was there on that island, he couldn't get off the island because the river was rushing around him and he couldn't swim. But he noticed that there was a fish in the water as he sat there trapped on this island, and the fish was trying to swim upstream and it was struggling and struggling and struggling. So the monkey thought, well, if I was a fish, which he's not, he's a monkey, I would want somebody to take me out of that water and set me on dry land so I wouldn't struggle and so that I could breathe. So what's the monkey do? He climbs out on the thinnest little branch he can find to get to where the fish is, and in a sense acts as a hero in his mind, reaches down and rescues that fish from the monkey's perspective, lays him on the dry ground, and then, we think so, maybe he just walked away and left him there resting. Was the fish resting? No, the fish died. Why? Because the monkey assumed that the fish needed the same thing that he did. The monkey assumed that the fish was just like him and wanted to be on dry ground and wanted to breathe fresh air. Well, the fish needed to struggle in the water. The fish needed to be in the water. The fish didn't want to be outside the water. He wanted to stay there. And so then we asked the question in our training, we commonly think to ourselves, I don't need to take time for training. I know the Word. I love the Lord. I've been ministering in my own country for years, maybe. I can teach and be part of discipleship groups, maybe lead children's ministry, maybe teach from the pulpit, whatever. Be part of a small group, maybe meet with people, privately and, in coffee shops and minister on the job site. I know how to minister. That's exactly what I thought when I moved to Africa. I didn't even know these books existed, as I've told you before. I didn't even understand the word culture when I moved overseas. And then our author so wisely said, would we go to a medical doctor that skipped out on medical school? Mm-hmm. Would you? Mm-hmm. Would you walk into a dentist that didn't go to dental school? You just feel the pain as I'm talking about it, right? Your jaw is starting to cringe. It's the same thing with spiritual doctors. What is an ambassador of Christ? A spiritual doctor. Some may be nurses, some may be physician's assistants, some may be doctors, right? Either way, if we do things in the spiritual world without training, it's just like somebody walking into a hospital or some kind of a medical office and doing something without training, we could cause people to bleed to death. We could cause more harm than good, more often than not. Is it true? Same thing spiritually. When I began to learn about culture overseas, as I was drowning in despair, and friends of mine helped me to come to my senses because I had no training, because I came from a church that didn't do missions. I was the first missionary, so we had no idea that we needed to know those kinds of concepts. When I started to realize it, I asked the Lord, give me an opportunity to be a part of training our faith family, Calvary Chapel, in culture. So to stand here before you today is an answer to a prayer I prayed 15 years ago. Lord, allow me to be a part of it. And then you guys have met Jeff Jackson. He's our other cultural teacher. He helped me come out of that pit with those cassette tapes. And then he helped me one-on-one over the years. And then finally I was at a point where I was able to come and be a part of your lives. So as I help you and you read these books from brilliant people, go out and help others. Because these are things that confuse everyone. You are not the first one to think you can just rush out there and do the work of the ministry. We all thought that, and we've all made major mistakes. What word would you use to describe the monkey when he went out on that limb over that raging water and helped that fish? What word would you use to describe that monkey's character?
Courageous.
Courageous. The one I put was brave. Same thing. Would you agree? Courageous and brave. What actually was that monkey? Foolish and naive. So just because you're willing to risk it all doesn't mean you're helping. That's what it comes down to. Just because you're willing to die to yourself and run off to these faraway places with malaria, let's say for some people, with terrorism for others, with kidnappings and all kinds of insanity like the bus bombings I told you about in Sri Lanka, doesn't make me equipped to truly help. It just means I have passion. What do we call that? Zeal without knowledge. You've heard the term, zeal without knowledge. How guilty are we, most missionaries, as they first feel the call to rush out and, in a sense, do things without knowledge? Why did the monkey take the fish out of the water?
He thought they were the same.
He thought he was going to save him. He took him out of the water because he thought he was going to save him. What did he end up doing? He killed him. He killed him. Now, I think that the analogy was done with animals so that we don't have too broken of a heart to realize this could be done with people, but we don't want to, get that depressed in class. We want to know that this was only a fish, and that's okay, but if it was a human, we'd be devastated. But we're talking about humans. That's what we're talking about here. Why did the monkey do it? Because he thought he was going to save him. How guilty are we? Very. But that's why we're in this class. That's why we're taking this time. Next question. What advice would you give to that monkey for his future missions endeavors?
Come to Rob's class.
Get cultural training. Vera says, come to the class. So we're going to give Vera an A+ just because she's making us feel good in the class. This is the advice we'd give to that monkey. Watch and learn. Watch and learn. Watch and learn. And see if that fish drowns because it's in the water. It won't. It never will. It belongs there. After you've watched and learned, and it depends on where you are, how far you've gone from your home culture, of how much time you should watch and learn. After you have watched and learned for quite a while, then ask a lot of questions. So what I'm saying is, first we observe. We open up our eyes and we say, Lord, just show me. Just show me. Maybe I don't understand why they do what they do, but I want to know what they do. I want to know what tens of thousands of them are doing. Because if tens of thousands of them are all doing it and they all seem to be doing okay, it must be good in one way or another. I can't just rush in and change the way that they are. I need to watch and learn. So now I'm observing. Once I've observed, and maybe I've made a list of all of the things they do different than I do. The way they eat, the way they live, the way they go to work, the way they interact with people, every part of their society is different. So I make a list of all that, and then I go and I sit with somebody and I say to them, why do they do that? And they'll look at you and think, well, don't you know? Why? Because 10,000 of them have been doing that from birth, and their mothers and grandmothers taught them to do it. So they think it's crazy that you wouldn't understand, but you have to humble yourself to the point where you watch and learn, you ask questions. And then, this is the key that I want to leave you with this book review on, especially on this chapter, is we think about introducing a change in that culture. Now, when you say, you know what, you're doing it this way in your culture, maybe we can do it this way. When you think about making a change in someone's culture, don't think about just that day that you're introducing it. Say to yourself or ask yourself, if we make this change, what will it look like in a week? What will it look like in a month? How will it look in a year? And in 10 years from now, what will be the effect of that change? Will it be good in the long term? Will it be, and this might be a little bit rich for the moment, but I'm going to introduce you to it because we're going to talk about it in the rest of the semester. Will it be sustainable? If I ask people to make this change, will they be able to afford that financially? Will the rest of their society embrace that change? Will their family reject them or accept that change? When I want to go into somewhere and bring about a new idea, will it look good and will it be helpful in the years to come? Most of the things that I want to do in changing a society are not sustainable in that new society. If they were sustainable, the people would have already done it. But because I haven't watched and learned long enough, I don't know what they need. Therefore, I rush in, I try to make a change, and then I realize it's taking me 10 times the amount of investment to keep that change going than it would have been just to leave it as is. Let me give you an example. We're dealing with medical clinics in Africa, and I'm watching children die all the time. You save one, you bury one. You save one, you bury one. And when you dig enough graves for infants, it's enough to make your mind just like go crazy. How in the world can this really be going on? And you think in your mind, wow, if I just had $1 million, then I could do this and I could do that and I could build this kind of facility and I could do this. And then when I came home on furlough and I'm praying through all this, the Lord told me, sit outside of that local hospital and just look at the building. Now, I'm a builder and I'm a construction worker, so I can kind of see the way the building's built, and I realized that building was wired, technically, to handle those things. It's got oxygen tanks in the back to feed those kinds of things. It's got every kind of technology built into it by multiple industries to maintain that level of medicine. You can't just take this idea in America that takes thousands of people to keep it working and try to transplant it in another country where it's only you and one other person that even knows what you want to do. You just can't do it. You don't even have roads. You don't have anything. You can't even get an oxygen bottle to give to somebody to save them for about a day or two because they need that oxygen. Once that oxygen bottle goes out, what are you going to do with them? You can't maintain them. You don't even have electricity. You don't have running water. So the Lord told me, just bring it back down to what works with their culture. Don't rush in and spend a ton of money and then let it turn into nothing. Another example, a lot of people, this would be large NGOs, non-governmental organizations, the United Nations, the Catholic Church, huge corporations that have billions of dollars have gone into places like South Sudan where I work, and they said the people are starving, so we're going to buy 100 tractors. 100 tractors. When I arrived in the area of South Sudan that I'm working now, I saw a brand new, beautiful tractor sitting in the middle of a field with a flat tire, and it was beginning to rust. Like just sitting there. And I asked the local people, where'd you guys get that $45,000 tractor? Worth more than like 3 or 4 cars that I would own. Oh, they said, oh, some Catholic church person came by and said, you guys are starving, and here, I'll give you a tractor. And the people are like, well, that's great. They can't buy fuel for the tractor. They don't know how to run the tractor. And maybe somebody trained them to do it, but then they're like, we don't even know what to do with this thing. It started backfiring, and they thought they were getting shot at. And, right? And down in this part of the world, you don't get a backfire. Everybody goes down, starts shooting back at the tractor. The tire finally popped because of a thorn, so they just let it sit there. So a $45,000 tractor worked for about 2 weeks, and then now it's just rusting. Why? Because somebody said this is what they need. They didn't take the time to live with them, to observe it. There was no way to sustain that. Now, a practical book that I want to recommend to you is called When Helping Hurts. The book is very simple. It's the one with the blue background. When Helping Hurts is the main book. If you want to study this concept even richer, more in depth, When Helping Hurts was written by an economist that did a great job at explaining culture, worldview, and how we can help. And then once somebody reads that book and they really want to begin to apply it, then they have When Helping Hurts, the small group experiment or the small group exercise, and that's when you can get together in a workbook and start to work through the things, not just reading on your own, but work with other people. And then they have another workbook, Helping Without Hurting in Church Outreach. This would be benevolence ministries. And then finally, Helping Without Hurting in Short-Term Missions. And I think this is crucial. These concepts are very crucial when we start talking about people's worldview and getting out into their world and becoming a part of them. So I can recommend those books to you later. I'll put that online if you need it. But if you want to study that more, that would be by far the best book. Any questions on that before we move on?
Steve Corbett. Steve Corbett.
And it's a great audio, too, by the way. You can download that on Christian Audio, and you can get on Kindle. So any way you want to do it, paper, Kindle, or audio.
How do you explain people like William Carey and Hudson Taylor that went without training?
Well, what they did is they spent about 10 years learning Adoniram Judson, all of those pioneer missionaries, they went and they learned and they learned and they learned. Most people would go for a few years and then they would give up. So the word that we label on all of those people is tenacious. They said, I'm not going to give up. I'm just going to grab onto this call and I'm going to do it. And so Hudson Taylor, as you're reading his biography, he starts to break down as a European man or as an English man. And he says, you know what, I just need to become Chinese. All the other missionaries told me he was crazy. So he realized over time that he needed to do these things. And that's why he became the greatest pioneer missionary in the Chinese continent at the moment.
But didn't they learn in the field?
They learned it in the field. But realize this, it took them 10 years to learn what we can learn in a year in a classroom on a book. It took them 10 years to learn it by themselves because they started going crazy. If you read their biographies, you'll see it. They start going crazy. I started going crazy because I had no training. So the whole concept of doing a little bit of training now is to prepare our minds so that we lessen our trials 50% by just knowing. Knowing is half the battle, is what we say. So when you know is half the battle, and then you go there, and we give you more books depending upon where you're going, then you're learning while you're on the field. So there, in a sense, there's a boot camp, a basic training, and then there's further training while you're on the field, and you're always learning. No matter what, you're always learning. These are just things so that we don't make all of the wrong mistakes. You'll always make mistakes, but let's lessen them. Let's minimize your mistakes. You good? Okay? All right, this week, we want to talk about understanding worldview. Worldview shapes culture. Worldview shapes culture. So before we can understand someone's culture, we must study their worldview. So that's what we want to do today. We want to think about how we can go into a foreign setting and open our eyes and open our ears in such a way that we can begin to study their culture. Now, the interesting thing about worldview is only 10% of it is visible. 10% of somebody's worldview is visible. Right now, as let's say you get on a plane today and you fly to any foreign setting, and I'm talking about foreign language, foreign culture, I'm not talking about going to another part of America, I'm talking about something that's totally different. Their language, their attitudes towards you, and their actions in general are the only things that you can see on the surface. We've all seen icebergs, and we understand that 90% of an iceberg is under the water. Why did the Titanic sink? Because it hit an underwater barrier that was there that nobody knew about. They thought they were going to get around it because they could see the tip of it. But there was 90% of it that was sticking out that ripped that ship wide open and sunk the only unsinkable ship during that era. Culture is exactly the same. 90% of what's in someone's worldview is hidden below the surface. It can only be discovered as we dive into their religion. Now that's a hard thing, isn't it? I've lived in a Buddhist country. That was a lot of religion. And it was so different. And they would use oftentimes the same words that I would use. And so I would assume within the first week, when they say the word love, I have the same concept of love than they do. They did not. When they said the word forgiveness, I assumed that they meant totally, completely justified, right? Washed clean. They didn't mean that at all. It took me years to try to untangle their religion. And this can take up to 10 years, depending upon where you go. The religion and also the country's history. How often do we truly study the history of a country before we go to it? We don't. We just assume everybody has the same history that we do. Now, those of you that are bicultural, that have come from other countries and moved to America, you have an advantage on us because you've lived in two countries, so you understand the two different histories. But those of us that have always been in America, even if we speak two languages, but we've never known any place but America, we only know our history. So we assume that everybody else has the same history. History shapes worldview, which then, in a sense, affects the culture. The customs, where do they come from? Well, how long have they been there? Is that a 10,000-year-old custom? I'm living in Sri Lanka, and this monk, in a sense, comes by my house on a certain day. I had no idea. It was the day that the monks come by and ask for alms. And he asked for alms, and I just told him no. And he looked at me like, this is a 2,000-year-old custom. You guys remember that Buddhism started 2,500 years ago. right? Buddha was born and started his teachings 500 years before Jesus came to the earth. So Buddhism is older than Christianity in that sense. Not as old as the Old Testament, but older than the New Testament. Abraham and Buddha were born about the same time. So these Buddhist monks come to me and they're like, Rob, you're in Sri Lanka. You need to give us money because this is a cultural thing. This is a custom that we do. And I'm thinking, why? What's your issue? No, you don't have to. It's just customary. It's like you see somebody homeless and you give them a little bit. It's not that I'm honoring Buddhism or anything. It's just a cultural thing. Why? Because their religion and their history and their customs are all tied together. But I didn't even have a Sri Lankan calendar in my house. Shame on me. I should have known that on that day is the day we celebrate such and such. Now, the funny thing about Sri Lanka, thinking about customs, they celebrate every religion because they have Christians or Catholics, they have Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims, okay? And they have their own New Year, and on every full moon, it's a celebration of Buddha's enlightenment, which means I think they had 55 national holidays. Every day I was like, why is it another holiday? What's wrong with you people? The banks are never open. The public transportation system is shut down again. What's wrong with you? They're like, we like our holidays. They celebrate everything in the world. I mean, we had 2 New Years. We had Vesak, New Year, and we had normal Western New Year. It was crazy. It was just crazy. Custom. I didn't know about that stuff. Have a calendar. Talk to people. Read about their history. Sit with older people and just tell them, pour into me. Their belief system. Why do they believe what they believe? There's got to be a reason for it. And if 22 million people, like the nation of Sri Lanka, just continuing with that nation as an example, 22 million people believe it, there must be a reason for it. I can't be the only one on the whole continent, this little subcontinent island that doesn't know about it. I am, because I was unaware. I wasn't there as a learner in the beginning. And then their values. What's under the surface? What's hidden? Their values. Why do they have values in these things or those things? So here's the way we would say it. Worldview is the window in which every culture looks through to understand life. Worldview is the window in which every culture looks through to understand life. Therefore, worldview is shaped by their experiences. Worldview is shaped by their experiences. I think the best analogy is if you've ever been on a very large ship, I'm talking about a military vessel or a very large cruise ship. If you work in the engine room and you never leave the engine room, your entire world is that engine room. And maybe you have a little porthole about, as big as a football or big as a basketball that you look out of to see the world, right? That's the engine room. Let's call that living in poverty. Living in 24 hours a day work in hot climates, having no way to get beyond that. That's what you do. And you live and you die in that kind of a heavy, hot environment, in a poor environment. An Indian born in one of the poorest little villages in India. And all they look out is this little porthole and they say, that's the world. Why? Because that's all they can see. Now, if you've ever been in a ship and you've looked out of a small window, you can't put your face up against it and see on the other side. All you see is what's in front of you. So you get these little glimpses of reality. Now, what you see is real, but you're only seeing 5% of what's actually on the other side of that wall. That is their worldview. And then you have people that work, let's say, in the service part of that ship or that cruise liner. And they're in and out. So they see the people on the deck having fun, but then they go down in the kitchen and they work all day. And so they have a little better view, and they might have a little bigger of a window because they're working in a different part of the ship, but they don't know what it's like to work in the engine room, and they don't know what it's like to be a guest because they spend all their time working. Have you ever seen the sleeping quarters for people that live on cruise ships? They have almost nowhere to sleep. They have bunks stacked like 5 high. There's no privacy. So when they think of a cruise ship, they think of, man, that's 18 hours a day of labor, but at least I'm getting paid, and at least I breathe fresh air when I go up on the deck, but then I got to come back down here. To them, it's not relaxing. And then what do you have? The Americans, right? on the top of the deck. What is that cruise ship? Swimming pools, all-you-can-eat buffets. You guys have seen it, right? Everything. Movie theaters, dancing rooms, and you can go on this side of the ship or that side of the ship. You can go on the very top. You can go on the bottom. You can go anywhere you want. So what's the worldview of that wealthy person that is exposed to everything? The whole world. That's all. They know it all. And not that they even know what it's like to be the servant or to even be down in the engine room. Every person on that ship has a different outlook on what that life is like. And that's the same way with us. Now, I'm using a simple analogy to try to put this all in perspective. Every one of us were born somewhere within a category on this earth. Most of us that have grown up in America are in the top 92% of the world. So think of it this way. If you have an American passport and you're homeless, you're still in the top 92% of the world. Everything's at your disposal. You can do whatever you want. You can go to whatever school you want, whatever college you want, whatever kind of medicine you want. It's all there. The jobs are there. Everything is possible. Now you can choose to leave all of that and go live on the streets like many people do, or you can choose to take advantage of it. But if you're born in India, where are you going to go? If you're born in most of Africa, where are you going to go? Central and most of parts of South America, I should say, maybe half, where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. So to them, their worldview is so small and so minute that they don't have any idea what life is like outside of their little village or their little experiences. So all of our experiences are shaping our worldview. If we live in a monoculture, we have a very small view of the world. Mono meaning one. If we live in a multicultural world, we have a lot larger view of the world. So if you've lived in multiple countries, you'll find that you accept a lot more things than those that only live in small countries. So think of it this way. If you go into a small village anywhere in the world, even in Italy or Spain or somewhere that we would think is totally developed and Western, if they only live in that village, they're going to look at you like, what is your problem? Because even though they live in a wealthy country, they live in a small community and that's all they know. But if you're more of a global person, your mind and your eyes are open because you've seen life from multiple perspectives. So the unseen 90% is religion, history, customs from the elders, their belief systems. These are the things that long-term missionaries discover. These are the things that long-term missionaries take the time to dig into and discover. The other 10% that's visible on top of the water, their language, their attitudes, and their actions, is what short-term missionaries discover. And then they leave after a week and a half or 2 weeks. You can't discover anything that's hidden below the surface on a short-term trip. You just simply don't have the time. So when we take too many short-term trips, we, in a sense, dull our minds, or we cause our minds to become numb to the reality that there's so much more to understand. So the danger of being in a church or a church family like ours that does more short-term than long-term is we think we're fulfilling the Great Commission if we go once a year for a week. But we're not. What are we doing? We're doing something good, but we're only scratching the surface. And if I go back to the same country every year for 2 weeks and I never get past that upper part of what's obvious, and I go with all this vision and all this money and I get all these people together, in the end I'm going to do more harm than good because I'm never going to touch the true need. Long-term missionaries are there to spend time to get down into the reality of the worldview and then to say, as a ambassador to the Americans, this is what I've learned after being here for 5 years. On my short-term missions trip, I thought I understood the whole thing. Then I got here and realized I know nothing. And I actually know things I shouldn't know, or I believe things I shouldn't believe, and I've had to undo all of that and then dig down in, and this is what's really happening. So we have this short-term, long-term thing going on. Have you guys ever experienced that on a short-term trip, where you felt like you understood what was happening? And then you came home and you realize, I have no idea what's happening. And then you go back and you make a total mess of it. Reminds me, as I was reading your answers to the questions, I loved reading your answers after the monkey story. One of you said, and it was the best, and I fully have done this, and using the word fully will reveal that's my culture I come from. going on a short-term trip to a part of Africa that has no ocean and bringing surfer magazines for the kids to read, because surfer magazines bless you living in Southern California. They must bless those kids in Africa. And as the African kids open up, they're like, what is it? It's an ocean? What do you do with it? What's it like? I'd be scared to death to go out there in the water. I'll never forget the day that we were driving on the border of Lake Victoria. It's a huge lake, totally flat, no waves whatsoever. And the African lady I was with, when she saw the water, and you can't see the other side, right? It goes on for like 50 miles. She saw the water and the horizon just went on, and all of a sudden she grabbed her heart. This is a mother. Her name was Elizabeth, and she goes, Mom, Elizabeth, what's wrong? I'm thinking like she's having a heart attack. She goes, what if our kids got near that? It would just swallow them up. All of our kids would die if they even got near that water, right? Because in her worldview, that kind of water was going to kill them. It wasn't fun. And there I am like, man, if I just had a surfboard and a wakeboard and a jet ski or whatever, right? And she's like just terrified. I'm thinking, this is awesome. Praise the Lord.
Just sweet me.
Two different worldviews completely. We have to take the time to dig down and deep into their world. Now, the core of their worldview is the core of their concepts. Everything they believe in, every part of their life starts in what we call their worldview. So the worldview is defined. Oh, wow, I put that the second time. Okay, I'll repeat it. Worldview is the window you look through to understand life. It's the same thing we just talked about with the boat analogy. So in the middle is the worldview. Once the worldview is established, and every culture has it, then the belief systems rise up out of that worldview. And so they believe that life should be lived this way or that way. They believe this is true and that's not true. We should focus on this, we should not focus on that. We're going to unpackage these things as we go on in this semester. Once we understand our belief systems, then what does that shape? Our values. And so we value one thing and not another. I value living on the coast. When someone says to me, I was born and raised in Southern California and I moved to Arkansas, what does my heart do? No oceans, right? Or someone says, I moved to Colorado, and I think, wow, you have great mountains, you have great snow, but you don't have any beaches. What is that like? Right? What? Because my values are in the water. It's just what I do. You guys remember that recently it snowed really heavy, and so the mountains were covered with snow, and you could sit on the beach in the warm air and be in the water and look at the snow. And I thought, I love home. I love home. How many places in the world can do that? Almost none of others. Almost none others. Now, let's not talk about smog or anything else, but at that moment, I loved home. So your beliefs, they shape your values. Your values then create your actions. All actions happen because of the value system. We spend our time in the day doing these things because we value the outcome of them, or we value the result of these things that we're doing. My friends in the African continent especially spent most of their time sitting and talking. And I thought, what in the world is going on around here? One day I was driving down the road and I saw like 30 grown men just sitting on the side of this road. Now the road's all full of potholes, there's animals everywhere, there's buses going everywhere. So this wasn't like a casual drive. I'm dodging and weaving and I'm thinking, those 30 men are just sitting there. What are they doing? Nothing. You know what? They're worthless. That's what I'm thinking. Now I'm an ambassador to, they're worthless. In my country, if you're caught sitting for too long, it's called loitering. And it's actually against the law, right? It's against the law. Why? Because it's counterproductive. There is no loitering law on the entire continent of Africa or most of Asia. There is no loitering law. Why? Because they don't count sitting as bad. They think it is productive. I think it's not productive. They think it is productive. Why? Because of their worldview, their beliefs, their values, creating their actions. Their actions then culminate into the larger picture of their culture. Where does culture come from? It starts in the center of their beliefs and then it works itself out into every part of their lives. So let me give you an example. If I was to show you a picture of a cow, what would you perceive this cow as being? if you were a Buddhist, oh, I'm sorry, did I start with a Buddhist? Yes. If you were a Buddhist, what would this cow be?
Saint.
A tractor. The Buddhists don't worship.
Buddhist, I'm sorry.
We're talking about Buddhism now.
Yeah.
If I'm a Buddhist,
Yeah.
I look at this cow and what do I see? Tractor. Because I don't have the money to buy a tractor, and I don't want to have a tractor. Like in Sri Lanka, they grow rice. You can't run a cow through a rice paddy, but you can run a water buffalo through it. And you can't run a tractor through a rice paddy, but you can have a water buffalo. So I'd see a guy out there harvesting his rice, and all you could see was the guy's head and the cow's head like 10 feet in front of him. The whole gear was in the water, right? Because that's the way they live. Buddhists live in harmony with their society. They live in harmony with all nature. So they don't kill the cow, right? But they use it as a tractor because the cow helps them. They help the cow. They see themselves as being equal. Now, if that's the case and I'm a Buddhist, that's great. But what if I'm a Hindu? How do I see that cow? I'm going to worship it. Because the Hindus believe that when you reincarnate, you might reincarnate as an animal. And the highest level of reincarnation oftentimes is the cow, right? So I've seen Hindu families offering food to a cow in the middle of the street, and the cow's like chewing on all this trash that's just left in the middle of these terrible, unsanitary streets, and the cow's out there eating the trash, and the dad, the mom, the little kids, and grandma come out with food offerings, and they hand feed the cow. And as they're feeding the cow, they're taking that same ash that's on their head because they went to the temple and they put the ash on there, and they're putting that ash on the cow to say, we worship you, we honor you, we love you. And I'm thinking, there's tens of thousands of people starving to death, and the food isn't going to the people, the children, it's going to the cow.
And the cow could be food.
The cow could be food, but the cow's not. The cow's their God.
I know.
So you follow me on how worldview turns itself into actions and belief systems? Because Hindus believe that they are in subject, or they're subjugated, if I can use the term correctly tonight, under nature. They are not in control of nature. They're not in harmony with nature. Everything in life is above them, and they're below it. So they have accepted that place in their caste system and said, I will worship a cow because the cow is worth more than me. But that's not what others believe. Then, if you were a Muslim or a Christian, what would that cow become?
Beef. Good.
Dinner, right? Now, if God called you to minister to Hindus and you had a barbecue, what would happen?
Oh my gosh. They
Right?
hit me, yeah.
Now, you see how worldview works itself out? If I do something as simple as eat a cow, I've offended them beyond belief. They will never listen to me. It's better to be a vegetarian and honor the Lord. What does Paul say? Right? 1 Corinthians 9, we're going to cover it later. Whatever it takes. If I have to eat meat, I will. And if I'm with people that don't eat meat, I won't. I don't care if I'm a vegetarian the rest of my life. I had to learn these things. So, in one thing, I'll just use my personal example. In one moment, I'm living in Sri Lanka working with people that are Buddhists. They wouldn't kill a cow. Or I'm in India with people that are Hindus, and they wouldn't even hit a cow with a stick because that would be hitting their God. And then I go to Africa and they said, Rob, we're going to have a festival. Here's the knife. Would you like to do the honors? I mean, seriously, 6 months ago, I'm in Africa, and for the first time, I actually killed a cow. It was the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. I'm like, this isn't sanitary. This is not like being in America where it just happens somewhere behind a wall, and then you get a little perfectly cut piece of meat in a plastic container with a wrapping, and it's all clean and sanitary, right? And the government regulates that. We're in the dirt, and there's all this. I won't even bring it up. If you want to see pictures later, show you pictures later. I actually put the pictures on hidden in my iPhone so my kids wouldn't see them. Because my kids would be like, Dad, I can't believe it. Why? Because I'm a Christian. I believe that God has put me in charge of nature, right? Never to abuse it, but to control it. What did the Lord say? Have dominion. The word dominion means be in charge. The whole Adam and Eve story to us is crucial to our worldview. Now, where do Muslims get their worldview from? From Abraham and from the same stories. So Christians and Muslims in this point agree. You can kill cows and you can eat them. You can eat fish, you can eat goat, you can eat whatever you want. So Muslims and Christians share the same worldview when it comes down to food. So when we are dealing with these things, we need to realize not everybody thinks the same way. And this is just one of a million examples. I just thought it would contrast the best, so it would kind of get in the mind. Think of these things. When you're in India, don't say, "Where's the beef?" Don't do it, right? Don't do it. It will not go good for you. So someone that wants to understand worldview must start as what? A learner. Just start as a learner. And the term we use is chip, 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 chip. Get into that rock and just slowly start chipping at it. If it's an iceberg, if it's a rock, however you want to see this concept, there is a massive amount of knowledge that you need to begin to bring into your heart, filter through the Word, because we're never going to offend God, but we will offend our moms. And we're going to understand that culture. And we're going to chip, 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 like a baby. Totally immersing ourselves into a new family. Totally immersing ourselves into a new way of life. Totally accepting everything without question. Now, we're never going to be totally like that. I'm just saying in concept, in theory. When we go into a new culture, we say, my mom taught me all of these things, and I can set those aside, but I know this from the Bible. So if it doesn't break one of the 10 commandments, if it doesn't break God's law, I'm going to accept it wholeheartedly, even though it feels so uncomfortable. Even though I want to reject it with all my heart, I'm going to instead embrace it with all my heart. So I'm going to chip away. A friend of mine that lived in China said that a Westerner going to China needs to wear what they call a learning permit for 8 years around their neck. You know when you're driving behind a car and the person's learning and it says student driver or learning driver, whatever, like be careful, go around them, and they're going like 5 miles an hour in a 55 zone. You guys have seen that? That's what a missionary looks like in China, because their culture is so old and so intricate and so rich and so deep, it could take up to 10 years before that person feels like, oh, I'm starting to understand. Starting to understand. In England, maybe a year. Why? Because they're a little different, but we have the same basic worldview and we have the same language. The further you go from home, the longer it takes to chip away at that stone and begin to understand their worldview. You will see that 10% on the top right away. Great, praise the Lord. Learn from it, begin to interact with it, and then realize I'm going to be chipping away at that other 90% for most of the rest of my missionary career. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, some of us 50 years. So before we take a break, I want to show you my favorite cross-cultural video when it comes down to communication. We know that unless we can communicate, we can't preach the gospel. All gospel activity happens around understanding each other in communication. So as we watch this video, just think to yourself, have you ever been in a situation where you think that they understand what you're saying and you think you understand what they're saying, but you have no idea what's really going on? In a sense, we call it the box of confusion. My friend Bond, he coined the phrase for me. He said, Rob, you did the training with me, and then I moved to India and then to Nepal, and he did a Bible college in both countries. I think he's in Nepal, actually, at the moment, at the Bible college. He goes, Rob, it's like a box of confusion. We've got Nepali national believers that all speak English, and Indian national believers, pastors, leaders that all speak English, and then we have our American group back here, and I'm in the middle, and they say something, and then I say it back to them, and then he goes, but all it's doing is becoming more and more confused. The more we talk, the more confused we are. And I assume because they said yes, they meant yes. Because they said yes, I agree with that, they meant they agree with that. But they don't agree with it, because in their world they always say yes. They never say no, because that's their culture. So it doesn't matter what you're saying to each other unless you know the root of the heart and the way that that's going to play itself out in years to come. We could be creating more trouble than we're bringing about a solution. So as you watch this, just think about it. When you are watching this also, think about the reality that everybody will be polite and listen to you when you're in their culture as a guest. So you go on a short-term trip, everybody's going to smile at you. Everybody will say, yes, that was wonderful, thank you so much for coming. But in their heart, what are they saying? Send them home, get them out of here, Please, when is this going to stop? That's what they're really saying. Everybody will smile and be polite because that's cultural. Cultural says, be nice, don't be rude, don't be mean, especially in a shame honor culture, which we don't even understand as Americans primarily. In those, they'll always say yes, but they do not mean the same thing. Inside, they're freaking out. Outwardly, they're happy. Inside, they're freaking out. We need to understand that. Most pioneer missionaries spend, these would be like you asked the question about Hudson Taylor, William Carey, all those guys, 25 years as the first missionary to go into that culture from another Western country before they begin to understand it. Now, the following missionaries can learn from the first guy what took him 25 years in the beginning, takes the next person 5 years, and hopefully the next person 2 or 3 years. But in the beginning, it takes so many years, it's absolutely insane. So let's go ahead and turn off the lights so that we can see this better. If you guys can, in the back row, just grab those lights and kick them up. As you're watching this, just think, have I ever been lost in translation?
Hey, you look happy. What's up?
I have a girlfriend.
Really? Congratulations. Where did you two meet?
Well, we haven't met in person, but we've been chatting online.
Congratulations, Les.
You're pish posh.
Ever since you got a girlfriend, you talk a lot more like a 60-year-old British woman.
Matt, this girl is amazing. She's from this small town in Estonia, so whatever I write, I have to put into Google Translator, but we are so in love.
Google Translator, that thing can mess stuff up pretty badly sometimes. What on earth is that language?
It's Nordic backwards Latvian schlangle.
That sounds made up.
27 people speak it, Matt. It's actually quite common. She's a beautiful girl, and it's a beautiful language. There she is, Helga Gatha.
Oh, she looks very agricultural.
That's what I like about her most. And today I tell her I want to meet in person.
It's a big day.
Yes. I love you so much, my darling. You're beautiful like the sea and amazing as the stars. I'm so glad I found you.
My brain just vomited.
Shut up, man. You don't understand love. It's complicated.
Oh.
I have so many love for you, darling. You are amazing and pretty as fireballs. I am happy I looked you.
I love you, Jason. So many, so many. I would want you to marry.
Oh my goodness, she wants to marry me.
Yeah, it might not be the greatest idea.
Oh, tea and crumpets.
There's that old British woman again. Listen, you need to meet this girl in person before you get involved in something crazy with someone you met online. I mean, she could be a total psychopath or a 900-year-old man. She could be taller than you.
No. Don't you even say that. But you're right. We should meet before we make plans.
Thank you.
I'm ecstatic at your offer, but I think we should meet face to face before we make any plans. What's your address? I will book a flight and come find you as soon as I can.
My love, I am happy at you, but I thought our face and face should meet before we make plans. What your address? I will Bible a flight and come look at you as soon as I can.
Oh! Oh! Mommy! Mommy!
Il a volé jusqu'à la gaga,
Oh, la pagara! Mi jabata! Oh, jubata pata! live in only cottage on Hog Hill Mountain in Pisca, Estonia. It's 2-day climb and our hills are infested with werewolf monkeys.
I can't believe I'm doing this.
You're gonna do this? What about the werewolf monkeys?
Rabbit monkeys.
I guess that's better.
I'm so happy. I hope to impress your family when I come to your house so that I can marry you, Helga Gatha.
I am so happy. I hope to come to your home and murder your family so that I can marry you, Helga Gatha.
Please, don't hurt me.
She's afraid of getting hurt. That's so sweet and tender.
I guess that is pretty sweet. Okay, she's growing on me.
I'm scared too, but I promise I won't hurt you. I stick to my guns.
Fear also. It will not hurt. I stick with guns.
She hasn't responded back yet. Maybe she had to do some farm work. I'll just sign off really quick. My heart bleeds, bleeds, bleeds without you.
Blood, blood, blood. Your organs.
Yeah, you should bring her family something nice when you come.
Yeah. How about a nice set of goats?
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Is that absolutely hilarious? You think about all of the things that we thought we were saying, and years later, when we talk to those people, they're like, oh, that's not what we understood. The problem that every culture has is we have idioms, right? Where we think this means something good, like my heart bleeds for you. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? I mean, take that literally. My heart bleeds. What are you talking about blood for? So many of the things that we say are translated in a literal fashion. We think they mean something good, like I stick to my guns. What does that mean? That means I'm not going to give up. But what it means to them is I've got guns and I'm going to shoot you. I mean, it's horrible. So now that was what we would call a verbal language and the lost in translation. Now let's look at body language. This is lost in translation, body language. And these are just simple, small, little examples so that we can see that there's a lot larger view out there of what we do with the things we say and the things that we do with our bodies. In Egypt, if you were to use this term by putting your fingers together, what does it mean to an Egyptian? Be patient. Wait a moment. I talk to taxi drivers all the time and they say to me, that these are Sudanese because they have an Arab influence, which is right by Egypt, and they go like this, and I think, what is that? And what they're saying to me through sign language, be patient, I'll be right back. And then they drive off, and I think, that guy's a jerk. He told me he was going to pick me up, I got somewhere to be, and he's doing this the whole, what is he talking about? You take that concept to Italy, which is just across the Mediterranean, and what does it mean? It means I don't understand. It doesn't mean, wait a minute, it means, can you say that again? Now, when you're in a place and they're doing this and you're not saying it again, they think you're rude. So when they go like this to you, it means, I don't understand, can you please repeat it? But you don't repeat it, you might think they're saying be patient. So you're quietly sitting there while they're doing this. They're frustrated, you're frustrated, there's no communication going on. And these are just simple little body language things that we can do, gestures that we can use. In Greece, which is not far from Italy, what does it mean? Perfecto is the way they would say it, right? when they make the right pasta, as you guys know, these guys can cook. When they make whatever their food is, what do? They taste it and they go, oh, perfecto. Not be patient, not I don't understand, but that's exactly the way that it should be. Now, here's the true question. What does it mean in America? Show me the money, right? Show me the money. How much does it cost? How much do you owe me? Do you have the money that you owe me? Like, let's say somebody in the audience owes me something, and I see you from across the room, and I don't say to you, like, give me money, but I'll say, hey, you got the cash? You got the cash? So just a simple kind of body language. Okay, I'll tell you, we're in a college class, we're not in church. In England, certain hand gestures do not mean what they mean in America. So, for example, let's use the language thing. You think America and England are exactly the same. My friend, he's a pastor in England, and he was teaching on the book of Romans where it says that God will discipline those whom he loves, right? So he's saying, and so like my son, as a father that loves my son, when my son does something wrong, I spank him. That's the American word for discipline. And the entire British audience, mostly young college kids, went, and he knew right away, what did I do wrong? I've been here for 5 years. I've never used that term in public. What did I mean by that? And one of his friends came up to him and said, that's a word that we use for pornographic things that happen between a man and a woman. In America, we'd call it bondage. So here's the pastor teaching the word, trying to represent God the Father to the people and saying this is love. And the word he chose to use in the common language of English meant totally opposite of what he wanted it to use. And then he told me, Rob, when you come to England, never count with your fingers. Because in America, I'll say, point number 1. You guys ever done that? Point number 1. Point number 2. Point number 3. When you get to point number 2, now I'm only doing this because you're an American audience, the whole audience goes silent and their eyes get really big. Because what does that mean? It's like using the middle finger. You see? So when you put up the first finger, you're fine. When you put up the second finger, now you're flipping them off. I'm just being really frank with you. So the whole audience is like, point number 2, what in the world is that American talking about? So he says, here's how you do it. You start with the thumb. A little bit of insight changes your whole message and your reputation in that city. Point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, as long as the thumb's up, all's good. Right? Yeah, when you do the thumb, you can do it this way, however you want. Just put the thumb up first, and then the finger, and then the other finger, and then you're fine. Now we're talking about England, right? So there was one way that you can say something totally wrong, and you can do something with your hands totally wrong, but we would think it's the exact same culture. It's not. We must take time to begin to understand. Let's take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the different kinds of worldviews and how to discover them. It's 8:07. Let's come back at 8:15.